Days of Glory by Frederick Bay, Series Rules. Chapter 10, Disorder, Rout, Recoil, and Retreat. These are the possible results of combat or fire, being disordered or routed. Recoil, a 1-hex withdrawal by a unit in good order or in disorder. Retreat, a retreat of 2 hexes for infantry or 3 hexes for cavalry by a unit which is routed. Rout movement, as in phase E of the sequence of play. So disorder. A unit in good order which becomes disordered is turned over to its reverse side, which has a white stripe across it. A disordered unit which suffers another disorder result, or a rout result due to fire, is routed. Exception. Artillery is subject to the same rules covering disorder rout as other units, with one exception. If an artillery unit is already disordered and suffers another disorder or a rout result due to fire, it is eliminated. A unit in disorder cannot make a forced march, expends 1 extra movement point to enter an enemy ZOC, cannot engage in shock combat or charge, cannot form square or countercharge. So actually those are fairly steep penalties. Rout. A unit can be routed either directly as a result of fire or for a disordered unit by suffering another disorder as a result of combat or fire, as an effect of recoil or retreat, or as a result of a failed cohesion test. Place a déroute or rout marker on the counter to indicate its status. If a routed unit suffers a new disordered result, it is eliminated. The counter of an eliminated unit is removed from the map and cannot be returned to play. When a unit routs, it must immediately retreat 2 hexes if it is infantry or artillery, or 3 hexes if it is cavalry, as explained under the rules for recoil and retreat after combat, which is coming next. Okay. If it cannot retreat the full distance, it is eliminated. A routed unit. So a routed unit cannot move except during phase E, that's for rout movement, or engage in shock or fire. Has no ZOC, cannot form square or countercharge, has no facing, front or rear, but must be turned toward the retreat direction assigned to it in order to indicate the retreat direction clearly. If it is attacked by shock combat, the attacker adds +2 to his die roll. If it suffers another disordered result, it is eliminated. If it has to make a cohesion test, except for a rally attempt, it makes an immediate rout move instead. Okay, if it has to make a cohesion test. If it makes a cohesion test rally attempt, it is penalized by a +1 DRM. If its retreat move causes it to leave the map, it is eliminated. Alright, 10.3, recoil and retreat after combat. First definition. Combat result or a failed cohesion test can require a unit to recoil 1 hex, or if it is routed, to retreat 2 or 3 hexes. And then references to the rout section we just finished reading. Following combat, this movement is restricted as follows. First, the first hex of recoil retreat must place the unit farther away from the attackers who caused the recoil retreat. Then, the following retreat hexes must increase the distance from the defender's original hex. If the unit has several hexes to choose from, it must always choose one which allows it to avoid elimination. So it can't, the player can't choose a route that would cause elimination of the unit if possible. Okay. A unit which cannot carry out its recoil or retreat in its entirety while moving away from the attackers as required is eliminated. Okay, that's very particular. Exception. If it is possible... Exception. It is possible without penalty to recoil after combat into a hex which is adjacent to the attacker without increasing the distance from him, but only if the latter does not exercise a zone of control into that hex. Example, into a castle or across a bridge. Recoils and retreats are measured in hexes, not in movement points. The additional cost of +1 movement point for moving through a friendly unit does not apply. Okay. Restrictions on facing. If the recoiling unit is not routed, it keeps its original facing. Okay. It cannot change facing unless at the end of the recoil it is stacked with another friendly unit with a different facing. It must comply with 6.1, the chapter on, I think that is facing in zones of control. I'll just take the time to find that. Chapter 6. Facing in zones of control, yes. Okay, by assuming the facing of the immobile unit that did not retreat or recoil. Stacking restrictions. 2 units in a stack which recoil or retreat simultaneously are not required to end their movement in the same hex. A unit which recoils or retreats may, if its owner wishes, enter a hex occupied by a friendly unit with which it could not stack under the stacking rules. See section 10.5 in this chapter, called traversed units. Okay. Terrain restrictions. A unit which recoils or retreats cannot cross a river except at a ford or a bridge. If it must recoil or retreat over a steep slope, a ford, or a bridge, it suffers an automatic disorder result in addition to all other disorder results already required. Exception. Recoil or retreat after combat into or through a castle is only allowed if the unit has enough movement points to do so. And then we have ZOC restrictions. ZOCs have no effect on recoils or retreats. Exception. If a unit recoils or retreats into an enemy unit's front hex, and thus into a ZOC, it suffers an additional disorder for each hex of this type that it enters. Thus, a routed unit which retreats into an enemy unit's front hex is eliminated. That's important to remember. All right, 10.4, route movement. This can take place either during Phase D, when a routed unit has to perform a cohesion test, or during Phase E, when each routed unit automatically performs route movement. The procedure is as follows. During route movement, you routed units must expend their entire movement capacity as indicated on their disordered side by moving in the direction indicated by the scenario, and must do so in the most direct path while complying with the rules for traversed units, which we're going to get to next. Most direct means in a straight line towards the map edge or hex indicated, and not the least costly path in movement points. Okay, I wondered about that. So you're basically talking about straight lines by hexes. Yeah. If the unit cannot move at least one hex, it is eliminated. Examples: movement from one ZOC hex to another ZOC hex of the same enemy unit, movement point cost of adjacent hexes too high, etc. For expending movement points, route movement is treated like normal movement. Exception: the extra cost of +1 movement point to traverse a friendly unit is not applied, and the disorder due to crossing a ford or bridge is ignored for route movement. All right, the stacking restrictions and those involving zones of control do apply. A unit may choose to stop its route movement when it enters a town, village, or castle hex. It then remains in the hex and is not required to perform further route movement, even if it fails its rally attempts. The player can still decide to resume route movement for the unit during a subsequent Phase E. Alright, subsequent Phase E, which is Phase E is route and demoralization phase. If it comes to any obstacle, including an enemy unit's frontal ZOC, that is capable of causing an additional disorder and hence the elimination of the unit, the latter is allowed to move sideways one or more hex columns, if possible, to continue its route movement. Restriction: during any given route move, an infantry unit is not allowed to move more than 2 hex columns sideways, and a cavalry or artillery unit is not allowed to move more than 3 hex columns sideways. 2 routed units that are stacked together must separate, if possible, during route movement, either by moving one of the units sideways 1 hex column, or by moving one of the units 1 hex less than the other. Two routed units that are stacked together in the same hex may not attempt to rally. There are a lot of none of these are outrageous by themselves, but once again, for the number of total rules pages, we're only talking a dozen. We're only talking less than a dozen pages of rules, and there are lots of little bitty bits here and there. Two routed units that are stacked, again, to repeat, two routed units that are stacked together in the same hex may not attempt to rally. If its route movement causes a unit to exit the map, it is eliminated. Okay, 10.5, traversed units. If a unit's path of recoil, retreat, or route movement traverses or ends in a hex occupied by one or more friendly units with which it is not allowed to stack, the unit may still pass through the hex, even if this causes it to move farther than is required. That's very particular. So basically, you can keep moving. The unit or units which are passed through, must make a cohesion test. That's what I was guessing. This maneuver can be repeated until the unit which is recoiling or retreating finds a hex in which it can halt while still complying with the stacking rules. If the traversed unit is a routed unit, it must make a route move instead of a cohesion test. Okay. The traversed unit makes its route move after the unit which caused it to route finishes its own route move. And I can see why that would make a difference in some cases. Okay. If the traversed unit then traverses the routed unit which was just traversed by it and caused it to make its route move, the latter does not make another route move. Instead, it remains in place. Okay. So you're not going to have this type of endless leapfrogging as one unit passes through another. Clarification: if a unit in a stack in any hex leaves the hex by routing after a failed cohesion test, the unit with which it was stacked at the end of the cohesion test are not considered traversed and do not have to make a cohesion test. All right. Chapter 11, Rallying and Demoralization. So first, rally procedure. Units in disorder which have neither moved nor changed facing nor fired, as well as routed units, may attempt to rally at the end of their activation phase. Units adjacent to an enemy unit are not allowed to make a rally attempt. Rallying does not, under any circumstances, depend on the order status of the formation to which the unit belongs. To rally a unit, the owning player rolls 1d10, adding +1 if the unit is routed. If the die roll is equal to or less than the unit's reduced cohesion, note that the counter is of course on its disordered side, with reduced ratings showing. The unit is rallied with the following effects. If the unit was disordered, return it to its normal or good order side and change its facing as desired. If the unit was routed, remove the dérouté or routed marker, but leave the unit on its disordered side and change its facing as desired. If the die roll is higher than the reduced cohesion of the unit, it remains in its degraded status and may make another rally attempt during its next activation phase. And 11.2, demoralization of formation. So you do have formation demoralization, luckily. I'm glad. Each formation is checked for demoralization during a route phase. That's phase E of each turn. If all of the formation's infantry and cavalry units that are in play at that precise moment are disordered, routed, or eliminated, the formation is demoralized. Effects of demoralization. The units of a demoralized formation may no longer enter an enemy ZOC, but they may remain in an enemy ZOC if they were already there. Immediately retire one of the two activation markers of each demoralized formation from play, starting with the next turn. That activation marker is no longer available. Notes: if the two activation markers do not have the same ratings, retire the one with the higher rating. If a demoralized formation is no longer demoralized in phase E of a later turn, return the second activation marker to play on the following turn. So there is a reversal of that effect. If the formation was already demoralized or has only one activation marker available. So this is telling me that formations can actually, in one game, one or more formations can actually fluctuate back and forth between demoralized and not demoralized, depending on the circumstances. Not that that's going to happen a lot, given the number of turns for most battles and the number of activations and at least one more, well, and the way the mechanics are designed here. But it is possible to have multiple formations move back and forth between demoralized and not demoralized. Okay. So if the formation was already demoralized or has only one activation marker available, leave the sole remaining activation marker in play. And that's it for rallying and demoralization. So chapter 12, night and fog. So first we have night. During night turns, the following changes are in force. Okay, first, no forced marches except for units arriving as reinforcements. Second, entering an enemy's Zoc costs 2 extra movement points to enter. 3, disordered units are not allowed to move into contact with enemy units. They may, however, leave enemy Zocs. Okay. 4, artillery may fire at adjacent targets only. Next, cavalry charges are not allowed. Next, all cohesion tests for die rolls are modified by +2. So in the darkness of night, it's harder for units to regain their cohesion because that modification is +2, which makes sense. In the dark, yeah, harder to put the unit back together. Next, disordered units which undertake no action and are not adjacent to an enemy unit are automatically rallied. And finally, rally tests for routed units are modified by -3 instead of +1. So routed units rally easier. Now that makes sense for a number of reasons. One of which, of course, is that I'm guessing, though I'm not sure, that the time scale is different for nighttime. Is that true? I don't see that, but if this is like a lot of other games, that's true. All right. And then we have fog. During fog turns, the following changes are in force. First, no forced marches except for units arriving as reinforcements, same as nighttime. Entering an enemy Zoc costs 1 extra movement point. Artillery may fire at adjacent targets only, that's the same as night. Cavalry charges are not allowed, same as night. All cohesion tests are modified by +1. All right. Note, rally tests are not modified by fog. Okay. I wonder if a game ever allows fog and night at the same time. And then what? Just curious. That is chapter 12, Night and Fog. And finally, we have a very short chapter 13 on victory. First, there's automatic victory. An automatic victory is awarded at the end of the turn in which it occurs. The game ends no matter how many turns remain to be played, I should say. Scenarios in which an automatic victory is possible will list the conditions for achieving it. So not all scenarios are going to have an automatic victory possibility. And finally, victory at the end of the game. This is achieved by scoring more victory points than the opponent. Victory points are listed in each scenario. That tells me that they can vary from scenario to scenario. So there are no base victory points or even a standard or a default. You take a look at the scenario, figure out your victory points, which might have obviously influenced your tactics and your battle plan.